Something astonishing happened this morning. Chris, my husband, apologised for something that happened 10 years ago. And Chris was very much brought up in an environment of never apologise, never explain. So this is surprising. And it was inspired by a conversation about statements against interest. Statements against interest are a concept that I learned about from Sheila Keane, who's part of the Harvard Negotiation Project, when she was on the Tim Ferriss podcast. Statements against interest are things that we say that put us in a less advantageous position than if we hadn't have said them. So they might be apologies, they might be admitting that you just did something wrong and something messed up.
Whose idea was this?
It might be telling people in your team that you don't understand people. The point about them is that they build trust, because if you tell me when you don't understand things, I am much more likely to trust you when you tell me that you do. Now, the reason this is significant is that I spoke to Tariq this week, who's the CEO and founder of Catalogue, and they've got some new data that shows that 63% of us are struggling to build trust with colleagues in a remote working environment. A similar number are struggling to get visibility of what other people are working on, and only a quarter feel that what they're doing is visible and seen by others. Tariq is concerned that we are sleepwalking into a crisis of trust, which will lead to mental health and burnout problems. So the question is what we do about it. My first thought is about how we interact individually. To the point about statements against interest, what are we doing in conversation and interaction to build trust, to do what we say we're going to do, to build our personal relationships? The opposite of what the FT was writing about this week, where they talked about an explosion of AI interviews and how that makes candidates feel.
2/3 of people don't trust their colleagues. When we saw it at a small scale, we were quite surprised. When we started to do the 2,000 person survey and we still saw that 2/3 of people didn't trust their colleagues, that's 2 in 3 people that you don't believe. And so a consequence of that trust is empathy that follows trust. If you don't trust your colleagues, it's harder to empathize. And if it's harder to empathize, it's harder to be a good colleague to begin with. In the absence of that, you're a tile on a grid. You're a name in a Slack channel. If you have zero empathy and zero belonging to the company that you're working for, the team that you're working with, it's much easier to jump ship.
Second thing is to consider the events and occasions in which we build trust.
1, 2, 3. No!
Tariq and I spoke before the rise of the variant that's very difficult to say when you spent a chunk of your career working for the advertising network Omnicom. But he was talking about away days and retreats becoming much more embedded in corporate culture and much more important to the stability of our organisations and retention.
A couple of months ago, we took the entire team to Barcelona. Everybody saw each other. A lot of the team saw each other for the first time. They were out having fun, going for drinks, going for dinners, and having fun activities together. I think that foundationally sort of changed the relationship of a lot of people within the team and how they felt being a part of a larger organization besides just their immediate team that we're previously working with. And we made it mandatory as an organization to do that at least twice a year.
The third thing is really around how we use technology. Now, you might argue that Tariq would say that, wouldn't he, given that he runs a tech platform, but actually really thinking about the ways that our tech builds trust and builds relationship versus makes people stressed out and hypersensitive is essential going forward, and one we need to be on top of.
The flexible workspace is extremely fragmented. People are working in different scenarios, different settings, different time zones, different tools. This is something that we hear from our customers quite often, which is we don't know where anything is anymore. If you think about the lack of trust in colleagues and the lack of trust of work happening inside of the organizations, then you start to see the recipe for a much larger disaster. The crisis looks like the Great Resignation. The crisis looks like not having colleagues that you can depend on. The crisis looks like working in places where you don't feel like any sort of belonging or loyalty. So it's a world where 2/3 of our life we spend working. And if that work life is not necessarily something that people enjoy, I think the burnout crisis is just only going to get bigger. The mental health crisis is only going to get bigger. And society as a whole will ultimately end up paying the price because we don't progress if the organizations that are responsible for progress are not progressing.
I'm very interested in what else we should be doing on trust. I'm interested in what you think about it, what you've read, and whether you are finding it more difficult to establish trusting relationships in this environment. For anyone still wondering, the issue 10 years ago was that Chris had left his shoes at the bottom of the stairs. I came down them carrying the baby on the way to lunch with Richard and Jenny, fell over them, threw the baby into a door jamb. She fell to the floor. There was a bit of a scene. She was fine. I was fine. But I do really appreciate the apology. And next on my list is the time that he rolled our firstborn down an escalator in Cyprus. See you next week.